Please welcome director Sam Fell and the co-founder of Aardman Animation and producer of the film, Peter Lord. So you guys later on can come down and check them out, but here are the puppets. How amazing.
The stars are here.
Actually, I'm glad that you brought these. I'm wondering if one of you, maybe Peter, could explain the process of making this puppet.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. It started very simply with stop motion animation, stop frame animation, which is an old technique going back to sort of over 100 years, really. And we have taken what I now regard as a traditional craft and sophisticated it. But so that these puppets, like this one here, this Ginger here, she has inside her a quite sophisticated metal skeleton, a steel skeleton, and her body is silicon. And you move it. You move.
Oh, that's the, yeah. That's the silicon hand. Yeah. So her hands are silicon.
Yeah. But that's all very well. But the interesting part is the head, really. I mean, interesting because it comes off, and interesting also because it's all about the performance for us. That's what we care about. It's not a trick. It's a performance that we do, and the animators take these quite tiny. You can see how small their head is, and the animators successfully, rather brilliantly, bring them to life.
And that's clay. That's all clay, the face and the neck and that.
And in this sequel, you guys added. I mean, everything grew from the first film. How many of these puppets did you guys have to make?
Yeah, I think there's Ginger's the most because she's the hero, so she's on the screen most. So there's 16 Ginger puppets. I think there's probably 16 Mollies as well. And it goes down from there. I think we had about 12 Mrs. Tweedies. So yeah, it's all multiples. And everybody has to learn how to use them. The animation team's about 30 people, 30 animators. And every one of those animators will do Ginger at some point because she's on the screen so much. Everybody has to learn how to bring Ginger to life in that particular way.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing, I think, is that when the movie's finished, you've seen the movie, you've seen Ginger. I hope you've believed in her and cared about her. And she's the work of 30 different animators have brought her to life, and the great art for the director Sam is to try and corral all that so that it just feels like one performance, not
And she's a lot, and it took 18 months the shoot. So it was 18 months shooting, and that 85 minutes that just whizzed by was a team of hundreds of people.
The opening sequence when the camera pans through the island. It is extraordinary. And I kept looking, how long did it take just for that sequence to film?
That was the longest shot, I think, longest in length and the longest in time to execute. So I reckon that would be 6 months probably. Like if you add all the planning as well, it's probably 9 months to get there. But so much preparation goes into the moment when they start, because when they start and they start shooting, nothing can go wrong, because they start on frame one and they work their way through the shot. It took weeks and weeks and weeks to shoot. So everything's kind of thought through and planned, and all the possible things that could go wrong are, planned for. But it was important to reveal the paradise that Ginger's found. It's kind of like the thing, like she won freedom, and that's her paradise, which turns out to be some kind of jail in some way for her daughter Molly, as you've seen.
Just to say that there was an absurdist side to this as well, I'm afraid, is that we had this enormous and beautiful set, and then the studio commenced to leak rather dramatically. In the hot weather, the panels of the roof opened up, and then rain poured in. So that enormous set had to move. It was which was a massive operation. Yeah.
Peter, one of the things I've loved about your projects is that we always their imperfections. Things don't look too real, so real. And we're also aware that we're in a studio.
Yes.
Can you tell us your thoughts behind that, that choice?
Well, first of all, thank you, because that's exactly what we want the audience to feel. I don't think perfection is a terribly interesting idea. I don't like perfection very much. So a bit of edge, a bit of bite, a bit of imperfection is what we like. It's possible now to make, and others do, exquisite, very smooth puppet animation, which is almost indistinguishable from CGI animation. And we don't see the point in that. We believe that knowing that these are real puppets in a real studio, sensing that if you were lucky enough to be there, you could reach out and touch them, knowing that they're puppets and believing that they're alive at the same time is the magic that we seek for.
Then, Sam, the choice of getting a little technical here about shooting in 12 frames per second on doubles. And it creates this texture on the screen. Can you tell us about that choice?
Yeah, same thing. It's all part of that handmade feeling. We always encourage the animators to leave their thumbprints on the faces as well. And then that twos thing, it just gives it a little. Like texture is a perfect word, actually. It's exactly. And so again, it's all part of that handmade feeling. And if anybody wants to get going, starting stop motion, I recommend shooting on twos, if not fours, in fact, because that also works. And so it just feels. There's a little sense of it being homemade, And the studio comes from Peter and David, his partner. They started together with a piece of clay and a camera on a kitchen table. And I still think we're trying to retain the flavor of that. Even though the studio's a big operation now, we still want to have that feeling of it's like sort of hobbyists kind of feeling even though that's pretty spectacular what we show today there.
Yeah. And Peter, when I introduced the film, I mentioned the first one is The Great Escape, but then now this one is a heist movie. They're breaking in. Tell us about how you guys arrived to that.
Yeah, thank you. So the first one, which is, God knows, I'm thinking about a meeting which must have been, 28 years ago or something, a very long time ago, when we met with, we've been all around Hollywood, meeting everyone. We had a dinner with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Steven Spielberg, who had fairly recently formed DreamWorks at that time. And Jeffrey, as was his wont, liked to kind of get things moving along fast, and was inclined to order for you. So he said, "We'll have the chicken. The chicken is just great here." So we were all solemnly eating chicken. Even he didn't know what was coming either. And and so what's your idea? And the pitch was, the elevator pitch was, we're going to do The Great Escape with chickens, right? Which I think we both feel is almost the perfect pitch, because as soon as you hear it, you think, oh God, yes, because a chicken farm does look quite like Stalag Luft 13 or whatever it is, and The Great Escape is all about all men, almost entirely men, being madly heroic with English stiff upper lips and and just fighting against incredible odds. And that's one vision in your mind. And then the other one is chickens, who are famously foolish and
not very bright,
and not very bright and cowardly. And so I think that when you hear the pitch, you oh God, that's funny. You can imagine, even though you don't know what's coming, of course you don't, but that's a good pitch. So that was then, and that was very effective. And then, heaven knows, we tried a long time to come up with a sequel and did not come up with a great option. And eventually one day, Nick Park and I, because Nick was the co-director of the first one with me, and Kerry Kirkpatrick, who was the writer, we met in his house in LA, and the little notion came up to say, remember Chicken Run? Well, this time they're breaking in, and that similarly tells you nothing about what actually happens, but I hope suggests similarly a world of comic possibilities, I hope, and action.
And Sam, focusing on Ginger and her daughter, and Ginger learning to let go of her daughter, tell us about the evolution of that story.
It's funny, we actually began more with Rocky and a son. We were thinking of a father-son thing. We had a male villain. And it felt like, the first one was Ginger's movie, so what about Rocky this time? And we went down that path for a while, but it became clear there's something really in the essence, and a lot of this has been about finding, what is really important in the DNA of the original to keep, and how are we going to evolve into the new one and make a new movie. But after a while, it kind of really became clear that actually, in the core of Chicken Run, it's that female hero, like Ginger, this amazing female hero, and her idealism. Like, she could have got out any time she wanted to, but she insisted they get every chicken out of there. And that's deep, and that's a big theme there. So we switched to her and started thinking about her and thinking, she's got paradise, she's got freedom, she's created this amazing place. What's going to be the next challenge for her? Of course, motherhood. Give her a daughter, make her a chick off the old block, just like Ginger, right? So, and it's a great sort of irony that as a parent you create these great bubbles of safety and for your children, and then it turns out that your children kind of don't really want it, and they want to go seek adventure because kids don't know anything about danger, and that was the interesting thing. Ginger's a little bit scarred. And we looked at Ripley in Aliens. She didn't want to go back down on the planet, because she was kind of haunted by the alien. So Ginger, that's when Mrs. Tweedy came in, because we thought, perfect, the rematch, the nemesis. Let's say that Ginger has to go out there and face the evil, her deepest, darkest fear, and overcome it herself in order to move on. And then, so there's all that personal stuff in the psychology of Ginger, but then also there's the bigger societal, social point, which is what Ginger's about, is like the plight of others, and looking after all chickens. She is like a Boadicea, or a Joan of Arc, So she's. And
how did it come about that this lady became a Bond villain?
It all came through because it's the dawn of the Nugget. The idea was already there with this time they're breaking in. It was like, okay, this time they're breaking into what? Well, it's got to be bigger, badder than Tweedy's farm. So an industrial scale farm. You could imagine the high security based around the first recipe for the first nugget. And it just became funny, that Nugget, the creating of Nuggets would be like some awful apocalyptic evil villain's plan, to kind of meet on chicken kind. So it was just that comic exaggeration. And so it was like, who better to be at the center of that than Mrs. Tweedy reimagined as a Bond villain, And so, we went to the V&A, and these are actual Mary Quant boots. And the hairstyle, we looked at Tony and Guy, and the kind of the styling of the time. We had a great time doing that.
And Peter, the first film and this film navigates this fine line between us understanding the fate of the chickens, and then also making it light and fun. But we're aware of the mortality and their fate. Can you tell us about that?
No, that's very true. In both cases, in both films, then we don't see somebody die, but we're made perfectly clear that somebody has died. A chicken has died in both films, and I guess we just knew that the stakes needed to be that high. Otherwise, well, the stakes need to be that high because we think if you take your material seriously, it's funnier, or can be funnier. There's and so that in the background, there's always that knowledge. In the first film, it was Edwina getting a head chopped off, and in this film, a nameless chicken going to meet her doom very very happily. And that, I don't know, it's like the motor for the story somehow. or the motive for the action adventure. You've got, as Sam has described, a very strong emotional motive for these two characters, but now what keeps the action adventure going? What makes it really crucial? And
it makes you care, doesn't it? Because you're like, oh wow, I love that. I love those chickens. They're going to die. Ooh. And you kind of keep watching because you want to see them, how they're going to cope with that high stakes. Yeah.
And there is a passage of time which isn't made explicit. In the original, we're in the 50s. Now it's clear that we're in the 60s. Tell us about that, making the choice of the.
Yeah, I think it's part of it just shifting it into like fast food, and a new kind of food production, and like the color that brings was nice as well, to change the look a little bit. Because Britain was really drab, post-war. It was really sort of drab through the 50s, but into the 60s, American advertising came in, and American kind of food processing came in, and there's a lot more color came into the 60s, into the UK. So it was a nice way for this movie to have its own flavor and its own identity, and be its own thing. So we didn't. As much as we love the first movie, we didn't just want to make a homage to the first movie and a nice, beautiful copy of it. So it's great because it meant we could start on the island where the first movie ended off, and kind of just naturally evolve into a new kind of feeling and a new look. Mm-hmm.
Which I think you've answered. My next question is about recasting the main roles. Yeah. You don't use the same voices.
Yeah, similar thing really. It's that evolution, and it's just been a long time. And I mean, I must admit, I'm a new director, so I think part of it is just me kind of making it my own. And there's certain, really casting-wise, we started with the new characters, Molly in particular, looking for, we got Bella, which was fantastic. She really delivered. But while we were there, I said to the casting director, well, it has been a long time, and the stories are changing. Like Rocky's different, his story's different in this movie, for instance. And I just asked her, what would you do now? Who's around? Who would you suggest for all the roles, actually? I rethought all the roles. And
another jaw-dropping sequence in your film is the slow motion hero walk of all the characters. It must have been hard to make that sequence.
Yeah, it's so difficult to do. It's like the opposite of twos. That had to be shot on ones, and be like the movements between them were just micro movements. So yeah, it's about the worst thing you could give a stop motion animator to do, and like nobody really wanted to do it, and I could like tell. But we were just getting a new wave of people in from Pinocchio, because Pinocchio had just finished, which was shot on ones. And there was a few people from that show that looked maybe a bit more technical. So this guy, Tiago, showed up, this Brazilian guy, and we were like, hey, Tiago, we've got this slow motion shot. Yeah, it nearly killed him. It was welcome to Bristol. Welcome to Bristol.
And Peter, everything is bigger now in the second movie, and I was wondering about how challenging was it with working with the scale.
Yeah, scale, that word defines many of the problems of the film, the challenges of the film, because yes, there needed to be an awful lot of I was going to say free range, roaming chickens in this facility. That was important. Crowds, you needed extras in the background, and that is always a challenge. So. I think that it's absolutely a stop-motion movie. It is, and that's what you're watching is stop-motion. But behind, in the background, there's an awful lot of CG chickens populating the world. And then the other challenges can be seen here graphically, because Ginger and Mrs. Tweedy are not dissimilar in height, but in reality, if Mrs. Tweedy was here to Ginger's scale, she'd be up here, which would be an absolute nightmare puppet, so which we can't do. Also, the sets get to be enormously big. Mrs. Tweedy is a sort of 1/6 scale puppet, and Ginger is a 1:2 scale puppet. And so we had to build, Sam knows all the detail, we had to build lots of sets twice, lots of locations twice in different scales. so that was the ongoing challenge, but the solutions were rather fun.
And speaking of sets, you have 3 big set pieces. You have the island at the beginning, then you have the compound, and then you have this creepy Disneyland. How challenging was it to build and create those? And there's such specificity to this island where chickens live.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought. We spent a lot of time. We began at the beginning. We didn't really know how we were going to do that. Butlins, or we call it Butlins. It was a British version of Disneyland, or it wasn't as good. But Butlins for chickens. But we didn't know how we were going to do that. So we started on the island, and that was all kind of chicken scale at least. And yeah, we spent a lot of time just thinking like chickens, you know, like just talking as if, you know, if you were a chicken and you built this house, how would you want your house, you know? And like chickens, in the first one, they'd lived in these horrible square huts, so we didn't want any straight lines, you know? They'd want to build curvy. And they're animals, so there's a bird brain kind of thought, you know, so they're kind of like nests. Yeah. And the way they weave twigs together, we wanted it to feel like half bird. And then just thinking through, like, okay, so they're going to grow vegetables, they grow all their own food, so there's going to be giant carrots, of course, and then, but how would they get potatoes? So would they have a potato mine? All these things are very briefly in shots as you whiz through, but they tunnel down into the ground with their little lamps on their helmets, and they pull these potatoes out. And so, yeah, just and windmills when they need power, water power. We spent a year on just thinking how they might put it together.
And then the layer, the
Bond, a lot of Ken Adam, like early, you know, Connery kind of Bond era, you know, concrete, a lot of brutalism. There's some real good brutalist architecture in London, you know, like looking at that. And we took cutouts of the chickens out with us and took photographs of them in these like locations, and you know, and that was a really quick way of like seeing how they would look. And then the fun land was the best fun, you know, because it was all that plastic and, you know, those, just finding like different references. Like Disneyland was definitely one. And then the British versions of Disneyland that were like not so great. There was a place called, weirdly, I look back on it, I come from an island off the Kent coast, and we used to go for day trips to Dreamland at Margate, which was like a big colourful fun fair at the time. So I kind of think, everyone's got a reference, and those little. I would live in London, and the studio's in Bristol, so I was driving up and down all the time, and I would stop halfway at a service station, and they had those little plastic rides for kids, and I was like, they were perfect, you know. Yeah, so it's kind of all around you, really.
Once you're done with the shooting and all the animation, how challenging is the editing process?
I mean, it's all done ahead of time. You know, we don't shoot till we've edited. So we storyboard everything again and again and get the edit really tight. We record all the actors' voices. And so it's all timed and thought through. And we previs stuff with a computer when it gets more complicated. So really, the edit process is like dropping shots in and like retiming slightly. And like take a little bit off the beginning and end. And, you know, maybe you can like speed something up in the middle. But there's not much you can do in edit. And then a lot of post-production.
I was just saying that the challenge compared to live action is you can barely rehearse. I mean, we do in a certain way, and you can barely edit. So all of that and both of those have to be done before you shoot. You know, and so it's you know, it's a limitation, but we're very used to it, and we have stratagems to make it happen. Editing, as you say, is well, it's kind of minimal in the end. Although it's true to say you're editing all the time. You know, from the time you start putting together the story reel to the end of the shoot, you are actually you're making small edits all the time. Yeah. And then with the rehearsal, we do some live action because you can't afford the time to do a shot 3 or 4 times. That can't happen. You just get one go, really.
Yeah, 97% of the character animation in this is take one. You know, like it's all they get it first time. Boom.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, what's next for the studios?
Well, happily, right now, what day is it? right now, maybe not right now, but we're shooting a new Wallace and Gromit film with, which is good news. Yeah, Nick Park is back again. He makes one of these films, then he gets exhausted and needs to recuperate for a year. But then after all that, he gets the urge again, the itch again. So they're back in the studio, and I think when that finishes, then I believe that our other old favourite, Shaun the Sheep, will be back in the studio as well.
Oh,
So.
that's awesome. So, gang, you guys are all welcome to come and check the puppet and ask questions from Peter and Sam. But thank you so much. It's a true honor. I've been such a big fan of you guys, and so amazing. What a delightful film. What did you guys think of the film?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.